The hunt begins. The jungle was dark and silent. The trees stood tall, their thick branches forming a roof over the land below. Strange animals moved in the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The air was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and wild beasts. High above the ground, on a thick tree branch, Zara crouched, her sharp golden eyes scanning the jungle below. She was a hunter, one of the best in her tribe. Her people were strong warriors, feared across the galaxy. They hunted for sport, for honor, and for trophies. Today, Zara was after a new kind of prey, a human. She had heard many stories about them. Some said humans were weak, others claimed they were clever. Zara did not believe in stories. She believed in the hunt. Now, she would see for herself. She had tracked the human for hours. His footprints were clear in the soft jungle floor. He moved fast, but not fast enough. His breathing was loud, his steps heavy. It was almost too easy. She smiled to herself. This would not take long. A foolish prey. Below her, Ethan ran. His dark hair was wet with sweat. His breathing was fast. His heart pounded. He knew something was following him. He had felt it for a while now. A presence. A hunter. Ethan was a soldier, trained for battle. He had fought in many wars, survived deadly missions. But this was different. He was alone, deep in an alien jungle, with no weapons, no backup, and no idea who or what was hunting him. Still, he did not panic. Panic meant death. He ran through the jungle, jumping over roots, pushing past thick leaves. His eyes searched for a place to hide, a way to escape, but he found nothing. Then he stopped. His muscles tensed. His instincts screamed at him. Something was watching him. Ethan turned his head slowly, looking around. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Then, there, a shadow moved, high in the trees. His hunter was here. The hunter watches. Zara saw the human stop. She frowned. He was not running anymore. He was waiting. Did he know she was there? Impossible. She was a master of stealth. No prey had ever sensed her before she attacked. She watched him carefully. The way he stood, the way he turned his head slowly. This was not fear. It was something else. Zara tightened her grip on her blade. It was time. Silently, she moved along the branch. Step by step, without a single sound. The jungle air was thick, but she was patient. She had hunted creatures 10 times stronger than him. She had fought beasts with claws like swords and fangs like spears. This human would be nothing. She leaped. The surprise. Just as she landed, Ethan moved. Fast. Faster than she expected. He dived to the side, rolling on the ground. Zara's blade slashed the air where his neck had been a second ago. She hissed. Impossible. No ordinary human could move like that. Ethan sprang to his feet. He turned to face her. For the first time, Zara got a clear look at her prey. He was tall, strong, his body covered in dirt and sweat. His eyes were sharp, alert, not afraid. And then, he did something she did not expect. He smiled. A dangerous game. Zara felt a strange feeling in her chest. Why was he smiling? Did he not understand? Did he not know that he was already dead? She took a step forward, raising her blade. You cannot run, she said, her voice calm. You cannot hide. This jungle is mine. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. Is that so? He said. His voice was steady, almost amused. Then why haven't you caught me yet? Zara narrowed her eyes. Was he playing games? She had no time for this. With a swift movement, she lunged at him again. But Ethan was ready. He dodged her strike, spinning to the side. His foot kicked out, aiming for her legs. Zara jumped back, avoiding it just in time. He was fast, too fast. This was not normal. Her heart pounded. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. The unexpected turn. Ethan stepped back, his eyes watching her closely. "I don't think you're used to your prey fighting back," he said. Zira gritted her teeth. Enough. She would end this now. She reached for a small device on her belt, a shock dart. One hit, and the human would be paralyzed. She flicked it forward, her movements too quick for the eye. But before the dart could hit its mark, Ethan moved. Not just moved. He caught the dart midair. Zira's eyes widened in shock. Ethan looked down at the dart in his hand. Then he looked back at her, and his smile grew wider. "I was waiting for you," he said. "The trap is set." The jungle was still. A heavy silence covered the land, broken only by the distant cries of unseen creatures. The thick air smelled of damp earth, of leaves crushed under swift feet, of sweat and tension. Zira's sharp eyes locked onto the human standing a few feet away. His breath was steady. His posture was loose, relaxed. Too relaxed. She had hunted warriors before. She had seen fear in their eyes, heard the sharp breaths of those who knew they were about to die. But this one, he smiled. That smile was wrong. It was not the smile of prey. It was the smile of a predator. A flicker of doubt crawled into Zira's mind, but she crushed it immediately. No, he was human, weak. This jungle was hers. He would fall. The chase begins. Zira moved first. Fast. She darted forward, a blur of speed and precision. Her blade, sharp enough to slice through bone, aimed for the human's throat. Ethan stepped back, just inches from death. He didn't panic. He didn't stumble. Instead, he laughed. Zira's anger flared. She twisted midair, flipping over him, landing behind him in a crouch. Before he could react, she lashed out with a kick. Ethan barely dodged. She was fast. He was faster. His movements were controlled, calculated, as if he had done this before. Zira's heart pounded. This wasn't right. A human should not be moving like this. But it didn't matter. She was still the hunter. She lunged again. And then suddenly, he ran. The trap unfolds. Zira smirked. He runs now. Typical. Prey always ran. It was instinct. A desperate attempt to escape the inevitable. She sprinted after him, weaving through the thick jungle with ease. She was faster than him. Stronger. She could hear his breathing, see the way his muscles tensed with every step. But something was off. Ethan wasn't running in fear. He was leading her. Zira realized it too late. The moment her foot hit the ground, she felt it. A shift beneath her. Before she could react, the earth vanished. The fall. Zira dropped like a stone. The world blurred around her. She twisted midair, trying to grab onto something, anything. But the walls of the pit were smooth, slick with damp moss. She hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Dust rose around her. For a brief second, everything was silent. Then, footsteps. Zira looked up. Ethan stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at her. He had planned this. The realization sent fire through Zira's veins. No one had ever trapped her before. No one. The smile of a predator. Ethan crouched at the edge, resting his arms on his knees. He was still smiling. "I was wondering how long it would take you to step into it," he said. Zira growled, pushing herself to her feet. She glanced around quickly. The walls of the pit were high, too smooth to climb. She was trapped. Her eyes snapped back to Ethan. "How?" she demanded. Ethan tilted his head. "How did I set the trap?" She didn't answer. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He chuckled. "Simple. I knew you were hunting me. I knew you were watching. So I ran where I wanted you to go." Zira clenched her fists. This was not possible. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. Ethan stood up, stretching. "I've been in this jungle for 3 days," he said casually. "I know it better than you." His next words sent ice through her veins. "I've been hunting you since the moment you arrived." The shock grenade. Zara's body tensed. She had underestimated him. That mistake would not happen again. She reached for the small blade hidden on her thigh, ready to throw it. Ethan moved first. He pulled something from his pocket and tossed it down. A small, flashing device. Zara's eyes widened. A shock grenade. She leaped back, but too late. The grenade exploded in a burst of white-hot light. Zara barely had time to think before the darkness swallowed her. The predator becomes the prey. Darkness. A heavy, crushing weight pressed against Zara's mind. Her body felt distant, numb, like it was floating in space. Then, pain. A sharp electric sting ran through her limbs, pulling her back to reality. Her head pounded, her vision blurred. A deep ringing sound echoed in her ears. She groaned, trying to move. Nothing. Her arms were tied. Her legs were bound. She was trapped. Zara's instincts screamed. She was the hunter, the strongest, the fastest. Yet here she was, the prey, the new reality. The jungle was no longer her battlefield, no longer her domain. She sat against a thick tree, arms pulled back behind her, tied with something she couldn't break. Not ropes, metal cables, human technology. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant creatures. The stars peeked through the tree canopy, cold and distant. And sitting across from her, calmly tending to a small fire, was Ethan. Not running, not afraid, just waiting. Zara gritted her teeth. "Release me," she growled. Ethan didn't even look up. "Why would I do that?" She yanked at the cables, testing their strength. They didn't budge. Ethan finally met her gaze, calm and unreadable. "Don't waste your energy. You're not getting out." Zara's golden eyes burned with fury. "You think this makes you the hunter?" Ethan poked at the fire with a stick. The flames crackled, their orange glow flickering against the dark. "I don't think," he said. "I know." A game of control. Silence stretched between them. Zara studied him. His body was covered in scratches and bruises, but he was calm. Comfortable, even. He had planned this. That made her stomach twist. No human should be able to do this. Not against her. "What are you?" she asked, voice low. Ethan smirked. "You tell me." Zara narrowed her eyes. "Humans are weak." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Zara pulled against the bindings again, her muscles straining. Ethan didn't react. He just watched, waiting. Something about his stare made Zara's anger boil. He wasn't just holding her captive. He was studying her. Like she was the experiment. Like she was the prey. The shift in power. Ethan leaned back against a tree. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something dangerous. Understanding. "You aliens always think you're the top of the food chain," he mused. "You drop onto new worlds, pick your targets, play your little hunting games." He shook his head. "You never think the prey might fight back." Zara bared her teeth. "You are still prey." Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. "Is that so?" He stood up, stretching. "Then why are you the one tied to a tree?" Zara growled, pulling harder against the cables. Her muscles burned, but the bindings didn't give. Ethan nodded. "Good. Keep trying. Learn what failure feels like." Zara's breath hitched. She knew what he was doing. He was testing her. He was playing her own game against her. The dangerous truth. Ethan picked up something from the ground. Zara's own blade. He turned it over in his hands, examining the alien metal. "Nice weapon," he said. "Sharp, deadly." He flipped it casually, the blade catching the firelight. Then, with a sudden flick, he drove it into the ground between them. Zara's eyes snapped to it. Her blade, within reach. Ethan smirked. "Go on. Try." A trap. She knew it. But she didn't care. In a single, explosive motion, Zara lunged forward, twisting her body, her fingers stretching for the hilt. Pain. A white-hot shock coursed through her body. Her muscles locked. She gasped, her breath stolen. The cables weren't just bindings. They were electrified. She collapsed back against the tree, gasping. Her fingers curled, her body twitching. Ethan crouched beside her, watching with quiet patience. "Now you understand," he said softly. "You're not the hunter here." Zira struggled to catch her breath, fury burning through her veins. Ethan leaned in closer. "You wanted to hunt a human. Well," his smile returned, but this time it was cold. "Now the human is hunting you." A game of survival. Pain lingered in Zira's muscles, the electric shock still pulsing through her nerves. She gritted her teeth, forcing her breathing to steady. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. She was still tied to the tree, her body aching from the failed attempt to escape. Ethan sat across from her, carving something with a small blade. Her blade. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He was too calm, too in control. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Zira had hunted many creatures before. She had faced beasts that could tear through steel, warriors with 100 battles behind them. Yet this human was different. For the first time, she was not just hunting. She was being studied. She didn't like it. "The rules have changed." Ethan finally broke the silence. "Do you know what the difference is between a good hunter and a dead one?" Zira glared at him, saying nothing. Ethan didn't seem to mind. He continued carving, slow and methodical. A dead hunter underestimates his prey. He flicked a piece of wood into the fire. It cracked loudly as the flames consumed it. "You did exactly that." Zira's hands curled into fists. Ethan smirked. "I've been watching you, Zira. You think this jungle is yours. You think you control this hunt. But you never stop to wonder." He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes gleaming in the firelight. "What if you were the one being hunted?" Zira's pulse pounded in her ears. The art of the hunt. Ethan stood up, stretching. "This isn't about strength," he said, pacing slowly. "It's about patience, strategy, control." He gestured toward her. "Look at yourself. You were so sure you'd catch me, and now you're stuck." Zira growled. "You won by luck." Ethan chuckled. "Luck? No. I planned this. Every step." He tapped his temple. "See, I've been hunted before. Not by your kind, but by people just like you, killers who think they can't lose. You all make the same mistake." Zira yanked against the cables again, frustration boiling inside her. She would not lose to him. Ethan watched her struggle, then shook his head. "You're wasting energy. The more you fight, the more tired you get." Zira froze. She knew what he was doing. He was breaking her down. This wasn't just about holding her captive. He was testing her, studying her, wearing her down. The unseen threat. Ethan crouched down, picking up a vine from the jungle floor. He pulled it tight between his hands. "This jungle has rules," he said. "You ignored them." He began tying the vine into knots, his movements practiced, almost lazy. "You stepped into my world, thinking you were the only predator here." He flicked his wrist, and the knot tightened with a snap. "But there's always something bigger." Zira narrowed her eyes. "And what are you?" Ethan's smirk returned. "Someone who refuses to be the prey." He tossed the vine aside and stood up. "Now, let's see how well you survive." Zira's muscles tensed. "Survive." Then she heard it, a low guttural growl. Not from Ethan. From the jungle. The real test begins. Zira stilled, her sharp ears catching the sound. Something was coming. Ethan had known. He had planned for this. He had tied her here on purpose. The rustling in the trees grew louder. A pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared in the darkness. Then another. Then more. Zira knew those creatures. Jungle stalkers. Fast. Silent. Deadly. They hunted in packs. They tore their prey apart in seconds. Ethan took a step back, but not in fear. In anticipation. He tossed a small knife near Zyra's feet, just close enough for her to reach if she tried hard enough. Then he grinned. "Let's see if you're as good as you think you are." And then he walked away, leaving her tied to the tree, leaving her to survive on her own. The glowing eyes in the darkness moved closer. The jungle stalkers were circling now. Zyra's breath came fast and sharp. Her muscles screamed for action. The hunter had become the prey, but not for long. Her fingers stretched toward the blade. The real hunt was about to begin. The great escape. The jungle was alive. Glowing yellow eyes pierced through the darkness, shifting, circling. The low growls of the jungle stalkers rumbled through the air, vibrating through the tree trunks. Their claws scraped against the damp earth, moving closer, their hunger thick in the air. Zyra's pulse pounded. She was still tied. Ethan had left her here, not to die, but to prove a point. A hunter is only as strong as their ability to survive. And right now, Zyra wasn't hunting. She was the hunted. Her fingers strained against the cables, reaching for the blade he had tossed near her feet. The metal gleamed in the firelight, just barely within reach. The stalkers growled louder. One of them moved forward, muscles rippling under its black fur, saliva dripping from its fangs. She had seconds. Zyra inhaled sharply, then twisted her body. Pain shot through her shoulders as she contorted, forcing her fingers closer to the blade. Closer. Closer. Her fingers touched the hilt. The closest stalker pounced. The hunter returns. Zyra yanked the blade free and swung it just as the beast lunged. The knife slashed across the stalker's face, sending a spray of dark blood into the air. The creature howled in rage, tumbling back, its claws barely missing her throat. But the others were already moving. Zyra's instincts took over. She twisted her wrist, cutting through the cables around her hands. The second the metal restraints snapped, she dropped into a roll, slicing through the bindings on her legs as she moved. The second stalker lunged. Zyra dodged, rolling under its attack, coming up free. Her golden eyes locked onto the pack. Her muscles burned, her heart thundered. But now she had her weapon. Now she was hunting again. The jungle fights back. The pack hesitated. Their prey was supposed to be weak, trapped. But now she stood tall, her blade dripping, her stance predatory. One of them, bigger than the rest, the alpha, snarled and lunged. Zyra met it head-on. She ducked low, dodging its claws by inches. The beast roared as she spun around it, leaping onto its back. With one smooth, brutal movement, she drove her blade deep into its neck. The creature thrashed, letting out a horrible gurgling cry before collapsing. Silence. The rest of the pack stopped moving. Their leader was dead. And Zyra stood there, panting, very much alive. The stalkers backed away. Without their alpha, they had no order, no direction. Within seconds, they melted back into the jungle, their glowing eyes vanishing one by one. Zyra exhaled slowly. She had won. But now she had a different hunt to finish. The chase begins again. She turned sharply, her golden eyes locking onto a fresh trail in the dirt. Ethan's footprints. He had walked away from her, confident she wouldn't escape, confident she would be too busy surviving to come after him. Zyra smirked. Big mistake. Now she was the one hunting him. She moved fast, slipping through the jungle with practiced ease. The scent of smoke still hung in the air from the fire he had left behind. His trail was fresh. And this time, she wouldn't underestimate him. This time, she would finish the hunt. The moment of truth. She tracked him for miles, her movements silent. No more recklessness, no more arrogance. She was a shadow in the jungle now, her heartbeat steady, her blade firm in her grip. Then she saw him. Ethan was sitting on a fallen log, sharpening a wooden spear. Calm, relaxed, like he was waiting for her. Zira narrowed her eyes. Did he know she was here? She crept forward, slow, deliberate. One strike. That was all she needed. She raised her blade, and Ethan spoke. Took you long enough. Zira froze. Ethan turned his head slightly, the smallest grin on his face. I was starting to think you didn't want revenge. Zira's grip tightened around her blade. Ethan placed his wooden spear down carefully. Then he looked at her, truly looked at her. You learned something, didn't you? Zira didn't answer. Because the truth was, he was right. She had hunted before, killed before. But this was the first time she had been hunted herself. The first time she had truly fought to survive. And she had won. Not because she was the strongest, but because she adapted. Ethan nodded, as if he could see the realization on her face. So, what now? Zira exhaled. She could kill him. Right now. Prove she was still the dominant hunter. But somehow, that didn't feel like victory anymore. Instead, she tilted her head, considering him. You're not like the others. Ethan smirked. Neither are you. A strange silence passed between them. Two predators, two survivors. And for the first time, the hunt didn't feel so simple anymore. The final battle. The jungle was still. The moon cast long shadows between the towering trees. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading embers from Ethan's dying fire. Two figures stood across from each other, motionless. One, a seasoned alien hunter, golden eyes sharp, blade gripped tight. The other, a lone human, calm, unarmed, yet not afraid. Zira's muscles tensed. Her body still ached from the fight with the jungle stalkers, but she ignored the pain. This was the moment. The hunt was over. The battle was about to begin. Ethan exhaled slowly, watching her. Then, with a small smirk, he picked up his spear. So, you're still here. Zira took a step forward, her blade gleaming in the moonlight. You knew I'd come. Ethan twirled the spear in his hand, testing its weight. I was counting on it. They stared at each other in silence. Then they moved. Speed versus strategy. Zira struck first. A blur of motion. She lunged, her blade slicing through the air toward Ethan's throat. But he was already gone. Ethan ducked, rolling beneath the attack, his movements fast, too fast for a normal human. Zira landed gracefully, twisting to strike again. This time, Ethan used the spear to redirect her blade, angling it just enough to throw her off balance. She hissed in frustration. He wasn't just dodging. He was controlling the fight. Fine. She would stop holding back. With a snarl, she vanished into the darkness. The jungle's weapon. Ethan stood still, gripping his spear tightly. He knew what was coming. Zira was faster than him, stronger. She had trained her entire life to hunt, to kill. If he fought her way, he would lose. But this was his jungle now. The leaves rustled, a whisper of movement. He spun, just as Zira struck from behind. Her blade flashed toward his spine. Ethan twisted, snapping a branch from the ground and throwing it into her path. The sudden impact slowed her, just enough for Ethan to roll away and gain distance. Zira clicked her tongue in irritation. Clever. Ethan smiled. You're not the only one who can use the jungle. They circled each other again. This wasn't just a fight. This was a game of adaptation, a battle of equals. Zira charged again, this time feinting left before kicking up a cloud of dirt to blind him. Ethan didn't flinch. He had expected it. He used his spear like a staff, swinging it in a wide arc, forcing Zira to jump back. She grinned, eyes gleaming. You learn fast. Ethan exhaled. So do you. Zira tilted her head. For the first time, she realized, he was enjoying this. So was she. For the first time in her life, she had found an opponent who could match her. No fear, no desperation, just the pure thrill of the fight. But only one could win. The finishing move. The jungle was silent again. Both warriors breathed heavily, sweat glistening on their skin. They had traded blows, each one adapting to the other. Zyra's blade had cut into Ethan's shoulder. Ethan's spear had bruised Zyra's ribs. They were evenly matched. But Zyra knew how this had to end. She had to prove she was still the dominant hunter. So she made her final move. She sprinted forward, faster than before, pushing beyond her limits. Ethan steadied his spear, eyes locked on her. One chance. One mistake. Zyra feinted right, but at the last second, she twisted midair, bringing her blade down in an overhead strike. Ethan stepped forward. Not away, forward. Her blade stopped. Not because she missed, because Ethan had caught her wrist. With his bare hand. A new kind of victory. For a moment, neither moved. Zyra's heart pounded. Her blade was still in her hand, inches from his throat. But Ethan had stopped her. How? She tried to pull away. His grip was like iron. Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. This isn't about strength anymore, is it? Zyra's breath came fast. She wanted to deny it. But she couldn't. Because at this moment, for the first time in her life, she didn't want to finish the hunt. Ethan slowly released her wrist. He didn't attack. He didn't move. He just waited. Zyra exhaled. And then she lowered her blade. The jungle seemed to exhale with her, the tension in the air finally breaking. Ethan smiled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Guess that means I win. Zyra smirked. Or maybe I let you live. Ethan chuckled. Either way, the hunt's over. Zyra wasn't so sure. Something had changed. Not just in the fight. Between them. She had come to kill him. Now, for the first time, she was considering something else. Ethan picked up his spear, slinging it over his shoulder. So, what now? Zyra didn't answer. Because she wasn't sure anymore. The unexpected ending. The jungle was quiet now. The battle had ended, but the tension still hung in the air. Zyra's blade was lowered, but not forgotten. Ethan's grip on his spear had relaxed, but his eyes still watched her carefully. They had fought. They had tested each other. And now, neither had won. Not in the way they expected. Zyra had spent her whole life proving she was the superior hunter. Every battle, every kill, had been about dominance. About being the strongest. But Ethan, he wasn't just strong. He was different. She had never met prey that refused to be hunted. Never faced an opponent who learned as fast as he did. Adapted as fast as he did. And now, standing here, staring at him, she felt something new. Respect. A hunter's choice. Ethan watched her carefully. His breathing was steady, his stance firm. He was waiting for her to make the next move. Not out of fear. Out of curiosity. Zyra tilted her head. You should be dead. Ethan smirked. So should you. She considered that for a moment. Then, slowly, she sheathed her blade. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's it. Zyra crossed her arms. I don't hunt unworthy prey. Ethan chuckled. Is that what you think this was? Zyra narrowed her eyes. You are not the weak creature I expected. She glanced around the jungle, then back at him. You understand survival. You understand strategy. Her lips curled into a small smirk. You would make a good hunter. Ethan shrugged. Maybe. Then he tilted his head. But so would you. Zyra frowned. I am already a hunter. Ethan shook his head. No. He gestured to the jungle around them. This was your test. And you passed. Zyra felt something strange inside her chest. The realization that, for the first time, she wasn't just the hunter. She had been the hunted. She had been tested. And she had learned. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. An unlikely offer. Ethan sighed, rolling his shoulders. So, what happens now? You try to kill me again. Zyra hesitated. That had been the plan. But now, she wasn't so sure. Killing him didn't feel like victory anymore. Instead, she asked something she never thought she would. What if we hunted together? Ethan blinked. Excuse me? Zira stepped closer, eyes locked on his. You are different. Smart. Skilled. Most warriors I kill are predictable. Weak. You are not. She crossed her arms. You survived my hunt. No one has ever done that before. Ethan chuckled. Lucky me. Zira ignored the joke. We could be stronger together. Ethan considered that. He had spent his life fighting alone. Running. Surviving. But now, he had proven himself to an alien warrior. He wasn't sure what was more surprising, the fact that she respected him, or the fact that he was actually considering her offer. Ethan smirked. So what? We team up and take over the jungle. Zira's smirk matched his. The jungle is too small. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Then what are you suggesting? Zira looked up at the sky, where the distant glow of her ship still hovered beyond the trees. There are bigger hunts out there. Ethan followed her gaze. He exhaled. She was serious. They had started as enemies, as hunter and prey. Now, they were something else. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You know what? That actually sounds interesting. Zira grinned. Then let's hunt. The end, or just the beginning. The jungle faded behind them. Two warriors, once enemies, now something more. Not prey, not predators, partners. And the universe. It had no idea what was coming.